fights, physical altercations, hey, they are known to happen, but when they happen, who's responsible for paying for the damages? Well, that takes us to this week's case. This week's case involves two guys in the state of Rhode Island. And there we had one fella, Wayne Bitgood, other fella, Ryan Gardner. Well, the guys were in the bar at the American Legion that was open to the public, and they got into a real tussle, real fight. Well, the fight came to an end. Gardner left, but 10 minutes later, he comes back. Fight resumes, and it became a major fight. Bitgood suffers major injuries, lacerated liver. Part of his colon had to be removed. He had other intestinal injuries that required part of the intestines to be removed. Really bad news injuries, big medical expenses, and he sued. He sued the guy that beat him up, sued Ryan Gardner. He also sued the American Legion post where the bar was located. Now, before the case went to trial, Gardner was prosecuted for felony assault, and he was convicted, sentenced to 14 years in prison. So when the case went to trial, the American Legion said, wait a second, we're not at fault, we're not at fault. This was a criminal act. You can't anticipate when criminal acts will take place, and they are the fault of the criminals. We're not at fault. Bitgood, through his attorneys, argued, yes, you guys are at fault. The reason you guys are at fault is because you knew that this guy, Ryan Gardner, was a bad apple. He had a black belt in karate, and he also had a vicious propensity. You knew that, and you didn't call the police even after the first fight broke out. That's what you had to do. Well, the case went to trial, and there the jury heard the evidence, and they voted in favor of a verdict for Mr. Bitgood. And they awarded him damages for his injuries, his medical expenses, and all the hassles he went through, money in excess of $500,000. Now, they found him 20% at fault for this, but they found the American Legion 80% at fault along with Gardner. So, case was appealed. Went up to the Supreme Court for the state of Rhode Island. When it got up to the Supreme Court for the state of Rhode Island, the court heard these arguments, looked at the evidence that had been presented at trial, and it came away saying what we find most important is the fact that the reputation of Gardner, the bad guy, was very well known. People knew he had a black belt in karate. They knew that he had a vicious propensity. And because that was so well known, as soon as the first fight broke out, the American Legion had an obligation to call the police and prevent any further injuries, and certainly prevent that fight from going on as it resumed 10 minutes later. In view of that, the Supreme Court upheld the jury's award. So the case comes to an end. And what do we learn from this case? What we learn from this case is that even when the bad things that happen are caused by a very bad guy, a criminal who is convicted for his bad acts, someone else who is engaged in that circumstance leading to those bad acts can be held responsible. Here it was a bar owner. And the bar owner was held responsible because they knew of the vicious propensity of the bad guy and they didn't do anything. Similar kinds of findings can take place whenever you've got people with vicious propensities showing up in places where people know of their vicious propensities. Commonly that happens at bars, could also happen at sporting events, can happen at rock concerts and various other places, especially when alcohol's involved. So there can be responsibility for those people who open their doors to allow people to come in, and some of those people are bad actors and they know they're bad actors. They have a responsibility. Okay. We bring you this case, as we bring you cases every week, so you understand how the law works. I'm David Allen.